Ryan, tell us a little bit about who you are and like your background and things like this.
Sure. Who am I? It's a funny question. Um, well, form level, yeah, my name's Ryan, and what I don't know what else is there to me. Well, I guess like what I do, even like so what I do, I'm not like identified with it. It's actually part of my practice is doing, I do things because it feels right, it feels alignment, but I'm very careful not to create an identity out of it, actually. Even though as soon as you ask me, who am I? An immediate response is telling you what I do. But they do seem connected, you know. Anyhow, so yeah, I'm a spiritual teacher, basically. I do mentoring, I make teachings and do online courses and such. And I also help out with Eckhart's online communities, his Facebook and his membership website communities.
Eckhart
What
Tolle.
else? Yeah, yeah. He's been a huge influence of mine. Uh, he's kind of the one that I would recognize as igniting my spiritual path, um, or where it really took off from reading his book, The Power of Now, and experiencing a lot of gifts of awakening, which then eventually led me to wanting to help others, to teach others, or just be of service, really. How can I be of service is a question I've been asking a long time, and I still hold the same question. How can I help? How can I be of service to everyone, and to the suffering that's on the planet, um, especially the unnecessary sufferings. I mean, there's some sufferings like people being hungry or something, which is important, um, but I feel like I can help as much as maybe helping somebody out of more of their unnecessary sufferings, like just uh, anxiety based on, self-talk or something. It's not, it's more self-created. And so that's a lot of what my focus is. And let's see what else about me. Um,
Where do you live?
Currently, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah, I've been here for a while, actually. 20 so years. I like it here. It's nice. Oh, I'm 30. How old am I? 32. I don't know. I like stopped keeping track after I turned 30. It's like, I don't know, just age, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but
Where did you grow up?
I'm born in Germany, but my parents were in the army, of the U.S. Army, and so didn't live there very long before they came back to the States. Grew up in Maryland and Raleigh, but the majority of my life has been here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Uh, yeah.
What are some of your hobbies when you're not doing what you're doing?
Oh, yeah. Chess. I've been really into chess lately. Like the last couple of weeks, I've been really enjoying it. Chess is such a rabbit hole. I mean, there's so much to learn as far as you want to go into it. There's a lot to study. I've been enjoying. I like challenges. Um, been into disc golf for a while now. I really like disc golf. I also like video games. I like Call of Duty, probably one of my favorite video games, the first-person shooter game. I've been playing those since they first came out. What else? Yeah, other music. Music's the big one. I love music, and I play guitar. I've been playing guitar for a long time, but I also just love listening to music, going to live concerts. Yeah, music's been a big part of my life. Definitely a hobby of sorts.
It's awesome. Yeah, I love music too. I don't play music myself, but it was kind of an initial, like kind of experiential,
Mm,
heart opening, consciousness opening experience when I found some bands that are like really powerful. That was really huge for me too.
awesome. Yeah. Emotions as well. I found music was one of my first like outlets into really connecting with my emotions, because that's been a big part of my spiritual journey. Is like for a number of years before I really got into all this, I was very cut off from my emotions, or like, yeah, I wasn't comfortable allowing myself. I didn't know what to do with my emotions, and I didn't like expressing them. Uh, music was, I think, maybe one of the first things that gave me a closer taste to the to my emotions. So appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I think as like men growing up in the West, in America especially, like we're not taught like really what emotions are, how to deal with them, how to be ourselves, how to accept our emotions. Um, what are some of your instructions for people, especially young men who are starting to maybe their heart is starting to open, they're feeling those intense emotions, maybe they're in a relationship, they don't know how to deal with their anger or their
Mm,
judgment like this.
that's a big question. There's a lot in that one, a lot of lot to explore. Um, let's see. Well, a really important thing for me is working with present moment plus some emotion. So it's like just this questioning, how do I feel right now? And really, learning to check in regularly and listen to how am I feeling now in a way also that like there's no wrong answer. It's just whatever I'm feeling is what I'm feeling. And a big thing I've learned with emotion is to just sort of honoring the emotion rather than fighting it or trying to fix it or make myself feel better, which is a common human thing. When we have an uncomfortable experience, we just want to feel better. But instead of finding honoring an emotion by first acknowledging it, oh, I'm feeling, whatever. If I check in right now, for example, though, I feel pretty calm, pretty peaceful. There's no disturbance of any kind. But if there was, okay, now I'm noticing it in the moment. And then there's an honor. I like the term honoring because it's sort of you're just sort of welcoming it. Oh, hello. Let's say it's anger. I used to have a lot of anger. So I've done many, many practices of catching when my anger is showing up, my reactivity is showing up. Uh, and then from there, it's sort of like, oh, there's anger in me right now. And and just letting myself feel that intensity without necessarily letting it overflow, because then it can create a lot of havoc and stress or suffering for other people. But also like really just being with the feeling, letting myself feel it completely. And then often I'd find when doing that, there would be deeper emotions, like maybe fear. Sometimes anger was the outer expression, but if I really went into that anger, what it actually was fear. So then I kind of work with that fear, or maybe it was sadness or whatever. But just being able to kind of slow myself down and be present to just sit with the feeling and just let it be there, give it permission, uh, just let myself feel it, and pretty quickly it passes. Not because I'm trying to get rid of it, but just because I'm allowing it. Just, oh yeah, okay, here's an emotion. Um, Early on when I was getting into this too, I never cried, not even by myself, let alone around other people. And that was a big breakthrough. Was when I did start really paying attention to my emotions. Sure enough, there was quite a few moments where I felt such an intensity, and something in me was just holding on, not wanting to let go, not wanting to just release it. And when I did, though, oh, it felt so good to just if tears did come, just letting it come. It felt amazing. Once I started to realize that it was actually very healing to cry, then I welcomed it more. And yeah, another thing that happens in the masculine, not just the masculine though. There's plenty of women that I've talked to that also find this both emotion and repression of crying and stuff to be a challenge. Yeah, it's a huge subject really because and actually a big part of my whole spiritual study and teaching is about observing our reactions. Oh, another really important thing is when you're honoring the emotion, like often within that emotion too, there are lessons. I kind of see it as like our curriculum. Like, so let's say, I don't know, let's say you say something and it annoys me. Now I feel annoyed. And uh, so, first I just notice, oh, I'm feeling annoyed. And then I can kind of, from there, I can let myself feel it. And then I can hear the story my mind's creating about, oh, he shouldn't have said whatever he said, whatever my justification is for being annoyed, right? And then from there, though, often you can actually go deeper into like some spiritual lessons. Like maybe I need to practice being more forgiving to someone who's saying something that upsets me, or maybe I can be more not as judgmental, or just like this continuous mirroring of of looking at myself, number one, in self-observation and taking responsibility for my inner state continuously, um, is where I can learn a tremendous amount. Because one of the temptations of our ego is like, I'm upset, but it's not because of me, it's because of them. Whatever. It's because of that driver, or it's because of this really annoying person, or it's always out there as to why we're in our emotion. And it's very tempting to believe, and yeah, on the surface that might even be true, though, is the tricky part. But what I found is being aware of my emotions and then kind of being willing to self-reflect for spiritual contemplation behind that. I learned a tremendous amount about my own ego and about or where when it shows up and how it shows up. And then when you learn these things, you can actually sort of dissolve them, and then you're no longer so affected, by everybody else and everything else, which is a real freedom. Um, yeah, to not be pushed and pulled by everyone else doing things the wrong way and whatever, you know. But
So,
an example just of too of how I think our emotions if we're willing to first confront them, but then kind of explore them in the self-inventory type of way, you can learn so much. They're like great. It's like it like just lays out your curriculum for you. It's like, and it's not a bad thing. If you get angry, all right, you got to admit it, and you got to work with it. But you didn't fail. This is okay. This is just the next lesson. Even if you've been doing this for many years, doesn't matter. But anger is showing up. All right, I got to work with it again. And that's been really fruitful in my journey.
it sounds like you're saying like emotions are like you feel them, you connect with them like right here in the body. Is
Mm,
that correct?
hmm
So
hmm
like would you say that like body awareness is an important step for beginners on the path?
Absolutely, and experts for all of us. uh, Yeah, well, body awareness to me, it's just a lovely way to be present because your body's always in present moment. Just like breathing is another really powerful anchor because the breath is always happening in present moment. So anytime you can bring attention to your body, it's a lovely anchor. Now, also the two, it's especially good for emotional awareness because emotion is your body's reaction. It's just your physical, it's like the bridge of where your physical body meets your psychology and the physiology meld. And uh, yeah, absolutely important to listen to. And also, it's also important because this somewhere in the Power of Now, Eckhart talks about with emotion how emotion is actually more honest than our mind, than our thoughts can be. This is where like I used to have a habit. People said, "Hey, how you doing?" I'd be, "Oh, I'm fine," and I'd actually believe that in my own head. I'd say like, "Yeah, I'm fine," but in my body, there wasn't fine. There was all kinds of stuff going on, anxiety and anger and jealousy and just all kinds of like emotional stuff. But in my head, I could convince myself I'm perfectly fine. So learning to listen to the body more as where the to really listen to what my truth is uh, became very valuable to like keep myself accountable, especially even as you start to accumulate experience in spiritual practice and such. It can be tempting to start to feel or think like, oh, I think I might be enlightened now. Which, if that's true, great, enjoy. But uh, if you think you're making a lot of progress, but in your body there's still lots of suffering kind of emotions, well, that's just telling you no. Nope, not quite. It's not happening right now. It may have happened in the past, but right now, if a suffering, which to me, suffering and emotion are quite connected. Um, but then it's just saying, hey, here's something else to look at, and and I've appreciated that as well because it helps to keep me accountable in my own practice to make sure that it's like I don't get too far ahead of myself and thinking like, oh wow, yeah, I get it now. Yeah, I'm done. I've fully graduated the spiritual trip now, and anytime a suffering comes in, it's like, oh nope, go back to the drawing board, which I've learned to really appreciate that humility. Before I kind of resisted it. I didn't want to admit that I didn't get it. It but once I realized, no, that's actually a gift because now you can just keep furthering if you're willing to just continually be aware, listening to the body's reactions, and going from there, uh, no matter how many times it takes, too. But
Yeah, would you say, because obviously with body awareness, the second word is awareness.
mm,
That awareness of the present moment, and you said the body is always in the present moment. So what would you say is like an essential practice for returning to the present moment?
there's lots of different focal points. For example, each of our five senses is a potential place to kind of anchor our attention so that we're not basically if we're looking at what is, where's the present moment at, we can also see what isn't the present moment, and that's past and future. And that always happens in the mind. Our mind is just kind of always going past, future, past, future, past, future. So honestly, one way to become more present is to step out of the mind, since the mind is where all the past and future is happening. Uh, but how to do that is a whole exploration and such. Uh, but to come back to your question, conscious breathing is a really powerful, very simple practice. And in fact, often I find the more simple you can get a practice, the better. Because it's actually our mind really kind of wants the exciting, stimulating, interesting, challenging kind of stuff, the heady stuff. Uh, but that's the very thing we're trying to get out of. If we're wanting to be more present, we're wanting to get out of the past and future so much, we want to be careful playing in the mind at all. So in some ways, the more simple of practices I find actually the more powerful it can be. And that's why breathing, just noticing the breath. Oh, I'm breathing right now. Yeah. I mean, we've been breathing all day. When you were sleeping, our body is breathing for us. When we wake up and we go throughout our day, obviously our body's doing the breathing. But how often do we actually notice our breathing? Right? And so you can notice it right now. Okay, I'm breathing. And the moment you notice your breathing, your attention is on the breath, and the breath is always in present moment. And so in that very moment you're noticing the breath, you're fully present. And it's a quite lovely feeling. It's a lovely anchor. Uh, so this is one. And then the other one I really love is what Eckhart calls inner body practice. And it's bringing attention more to the body level rather than just to the breath. It's bringing it to our hands, bringing our attention to it. Just throughout your whole body, you can move your awareness, the hands and arms, and through the chest and shoulders and stomach and legs, feet, head, and just going through, moving your attention gently throughout your whole body. Another lovely way to anchor in present moment and into our being. Actually, he calls it the doorway into being. And yeah, very lovely way to anchor. In a way, you could say a lot of these are just looking at how can we kind of learn to uh, control our attention so that it doesn't just get pulled back into the mind of past and future, which is where it tends to get lost in, uh, you know. And uh, so, yeah, the body's a lovely one. The other thing too, especially early on, if you're practicing these type of things, uh, what tends to happen is you pick an anchor, say breathing. Okay, I want to practice conscious breathing. So you bring attention to the breath, following the breath. And then a few minutes go by, and before you even realize it, you've lost the experience of the breath, and because your attention went really back into the mind and back into thinking, right? Back into, oh, what am I gonna do tomorrow, and what should I do later, and oh, that thing with the person yesterday. This is what the mind does. But whenever that happens, our attention got pulled away from the breath, so our breath is no longer conscious. It's become unconscious again. And in a way, we've become more unconscious because we kind of unknowingly slipped back into the stream of thought. And so a lot of the practice too is just noticing that, just noticing when we have an intention on, let's say, noticing the breath and you get pulled back into mind, just noticing when you get pulled back into, not judging it or anything, because that would also just be more mind, but just noticing. And increasing that noticing is a way of sort of deepening your awakening or your consciousness. And multiply this by practicing a lot over a long period of time. I mean, it doesn't have to be a long period of time though, but in general, it's like you become more and more familiar with just enjoying being present and having that sort of inner skillfulness not to get lost in unnecessary thoughts so much, which means more peace. Um, and this can be, it's great to practice this in seated meditation practice. You got a timer and maybe you're sitting up nice and tall or all these type of things. That's a good place to start. But ideally too, it's just, practice. You can practice conscious breathing anywhere. You could, while driving, while you're working, while you're grocery shopping, and anything and everything can become an opportunity for practice, which to me is where the real gift of this whole meditation and sort of a spiritual awakening journey really becomes both challenging but also most rewarding, is when we can integrate it into our everyday life. Not just in seated meditation, though that's lovely, but when we can just take it everywhere, and that's really when it's super powerful.
How long do you sense like for a person to start meditating, maybe every day, starting, 10 minutes, and eventually half hour, things like this. And then they can start having that sense of inner peace, silence, calm, awareness, present moment, like beyond the meditation cushion and like in present life, in daily life.
Let's see. For me, when I first started, it was back in 2012 that I first started practicing these type of things and studying. And one of the things that really struck me was I was working at the time as a kitchen manager, so a pretty fast-paced, stressful environment. Kind of intense. Kitchens can be pretty intense environments. And I'd go to work and I'd have a busy, stressful day, and then I'd get done and I'd go home and I'd be so looking forward to meditating. And I'd sit and I'd meditate and I'd really settle into this deep, lovely peace. And okay, yeah, back. And then maybe go throughout my evening. And then I wake up the next morning and have to go back to work and then poof, back into the grind of being a human and all this stuff. And at one point it just stood out to me like, wait, I love this quality that I get from meditating. And then my work environment is such an opposite. And I was just like started to really wonder like how can I merge these? Because I would love to feel just as good while I'm working and being getting paid even while meditating. That sounds nice. You know, so there's just something, I don't know, something in me started to click of like, wait, I mean, it's great to feel peaceful for 30 minutes a day, but now I would like to feel peaceful even more often, more consistently. Not only for me, but also because if I can show up, if I can sustain a peaceful state, I also will show up in a more peaceful way towards others. Whereas otherwise, if I'm in a stressed, anxious state, let's say at work, I might be more aggressive or reactive to the employees I'm working with. I'll make their experience more stressful, if I'm stressed. So there's also this quality of like the more I can take care of my inner space and work on deepening my peace, the more it's a gift, not only for me, but for everyone around me. See, I won't be as unpleasant to be around. You know, so there was something about that that motivated me to then uh, just start trying to bring bits of my meditation practice into my work environment. Like I'd go to work and uh, okay, focus on the breath, making pizza dough, but I'm even more so noticing my breathing as I'm doing it, being mindful not to be in unnecessary thoughts. Or this is where you can get intricate in all the little details of things you can focus on. But uh, I think one of the most valuable parts is just igniting that. The interest of even trying is really valuable, uh, and then yeah, you're just doing your best and you're learning along the way. One of the huge things within this integration process as well is really observing resistances, observing ourselves and noticing whenever we feel resistance and working with that. Um, but another a really interesting question to sit with for new meditators or long-time meditators. A very interesting question is so okay, you sit, you meditate, you settle in. At what point does the meditation begin, and when does it end? And what is this difference between meditating and not meditating? Yeah. It's very interesting to really look at that while you're meditating, of course, and then also while you're at work. Like what makes work not meditation? So that's interesting too.
Yeah,
Uh,
like how did I get caught, like in my thoughts or in my emotions at work, especially or at a family reunion, things like this.
yeah.
And comparing that with like, man, I'm so peaceful during meditation, and I'm so hyper aware of my emotions, but
Mm,
then in daily life I get so carried away.
yeah, as we all do. I mean, that's just all this is all part of the path, you might say. But uh, yeah, it's a very interesting. Well, and another part of it as well, like okay, let's say you sit and you're meditating. It's almost like we have this little feeling like we're turning the meditation on. And then the bell rings. Okay, meditation's done. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my normal, whatever normal is. Oh, look at my phone, go do other stuff. It's an interesting thing to look at how we have this idea of like I was meditating then, but what about right now? I mean, right now is where it all happens anyway. Uh, but that was a very insightful thing that somehow it clicked for me was when I started questioning it a little bit more. Like, yeah, what is meditation really? You know, and that was, I think that's a big part of what helped me then bring it into while I was working. Just being self-aware is one way I would define meditation. Just being alert. Someone used a nice term today. Um, oh, the term's gone. Never mind. I don't know where it went. Awareing. That's what it was. Like practicing awareness. You're awareing.
Like a verb. Awareness is actually a verb.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. It sounds like people from almost any background, religiously or even atheist, can practice these things.
Ah, yeah, I believe so. It's because it's not so much about what you conceptually think. It's actually not about thought at all. I mean, whether you're atheist or religious, both of those actually exist in a similar field of belief structure of thoughts, of a collection of thoughts that seem convincing or interesting to us, which is fine. And you know, I one of the things I personally spiritually like to do or feel aligned with is not really picking any side. Like, yeah, you know, when someone asks me what spiritual religion or practice are you, I don't know. I don't like to be anything. I don't really want to like label myself into one particular thought form, uh, and because it's not about that to me. It's actually more about seeing how the whole thought form game works in the first place, or the temptation to label somebody. Oh, he says he's Buddhist. Okay, now I know. I'm going to label him. He's Buddhist. Got it. And now I know who he is and what he's about. And which isn't actually the case. No label really defines a person. And also, yeah, regardless of what you believe, I mean, anyone can practice just being aware of themselves, you know, of how they're feeling, like what's going on in their space, of how they're feeling and what thoughts are arising. Regardless of what those thoughts might be, it's just this practice of noticing, inwardly noticing more and more. Whereas years ago, when I would maybe say I was a lot more unconscious, um, I was experiencing all kinds of intense emotions and all kinds of wild and crazy and unnecessary thoughts, but I didn't even know it. If you had asked me what I was thinking, I couldn't tell you because like I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't really here, you know. So, and then from that, I think regardless of what you believe or don't believe, it's like I don't know. I do feel that it inevitably leads to some experience of spirituality, but not necessarily spirituality and what a lot of people believe of and think of as like religious um, kind of rules and regulations and uh, uh, but more like the essence of what any kind of spirituality or even you know a philosophy is really trying to get to this sort of core essence uh, that's not just out there but is actually connected it's very much connected to us to who we really are our own true essence and the essence of these uh, important religious or philosophical or logical thought processes are trying to get at. There's some kind of essence underneath it. And it's in you. It's not out there, actually. It's inward. This is also why just going inward, it's like see for yourself, you know. I mean, you can all take my word for it. Just see for yourself. Go in. I mean, that's what many spiritual teachers end up saying as well, but uh, it's true. You are that which you seek.
What do you like, what got you on the path, and what do you think, like, do you think suffering, depression, anxiety, these kinds of things, or like loss of a job, loss of a spouse, are these like huge life events, or depression, like, is that how people get on the spiritual path, and try meditation, or do you think people can just like not like suffering is not 100% necessary to get on the spiritual path?
Hmm. Well, I could speak my own experience. Suffering definitely was a huge catalyst. I was 21, 22, and very turbulent mind, all kinds of, emotional mess, anger, and all kinds of stuff. Fear, had a lot of fear, paranoid kind of thoughts and different things. And it was just this exhaustion of how like messy and just heavy my inner space was that led me to just kind of a deep surrendering of like, all right, where are the answers? I recognize I'm not getting this life right. It doesn't feel like I've got the answers here. I'm willing to admit I don't have the answers. Where are the answers? Help me out. Universe, God, whatever, whoever, whoever, just I need some help here. And I think that actually was a crucial part. Just because one of the things our ego really doesn't like is admitting we need help. And that was hard for me to put down my pride and be willing to, ask for help in some way. And so when admit that I was wrong too, this other big one the ego doesn't like admitting when we're wrong. Uh, but my suffering was so much that I finally, I guess my ego cracked to that degree of just like, you know what? Okay, fine. I don't have it figured out. I don't even know what direction I'm supposed, like, I don't even know who I'm supposed to ask for help. It was something in this the relinquishment of the humility of that, though, that I think actually opened up space to find some answers. And of course, that's when I came across the power of now, and that really blew my mind in a good way. But now into the question of like, is suffering always necessary? I don't know. I've really contemplated that a lot. Um, I mean, it would be lovely if somehow I could find the magical equation that could help people awaken without the really intense, crux of suffering. They're having to reach to some kind of climax of suffering before they're really willing to awaken. They can avoid a lot of suffering if they could happen. Um, it would be great. It's something I'm always open to. And I do think that, some people are more naturally, you might say, conscious in some ways, like naturally not as prideful, or naturally more humble, or naturally more honest. Honesty can get you pretty far in the spiritual process. um, and those are all, those are valuable, very valuable to deepening. um, but at the same time, like, okay, so as a mentor and as a teacher, an interesting thing that I've come across over the years is like, I'm not in control of when something makes sense to somebody. So like I might, let's say someone asks me a question about their suffering and they want help out of their suffering. I could give them an answer, but it doesn't mean they're going to understand what I'm saying or they're going to like what I'm saying. It may not click. And I don't have any control over that, over whether somebody will really resonate with something that's intended to help or not. And it's very tricky because it's like, especially with trying to help someone out of suffering, because it's sort of like the very thing you're trying to help someone out of suffering with is the fact that they're so lost in their mind. And yet, uh, when you give them an answer, it's their mind that takes the answer and then processes it and usually misinterprets it or hears what it wants to hear, but that doesn't it disregards anything it doesn't want to hear, and then it doesn't get the results it was seeking because the very thing I'm trying to help you out of is what you're using to try to understand. Uh, not talking to you directly, but yeah, you get it. And um, so there's these like paradoxes like that like you can't really control, and it tends to be the thing that tends to break that enough to allow in some light, so to speak, is suffering. Is the suffering of our own doing, so to speak. And when that really gets to a point of exhaustion, then you're like, okay, fine, okay, I don't, yeah, I don't know, and I need help, and I'm here, I'm open, I'm listening. Uh, I mean, even for me now, what, 12, 13 years into this path, it's still really important for me to be very aware of my space, of myself, and to be really like willing to be humbled of, because it's to just admit, oh, I don't know, and then to be taught or to be reminded or to be corrected, to be criticized in a way that's valuable to my own deepening, um, regardless of how long you've been going along the path. It just seems to be a very important reoccurring lesson, and probably a seemingly infinite one. But yeah, at the last thing too, though, is I feel once you've had enough suffering, that enough humility is able to come in that you can really work with consciously going into your spiritual practice and studies and meditation and stuff, you can definitely have a huge influence on the amount of suffering you experience. Uh, it's just a matter of when that's when that really becomes awakened or sort of activated, um, is a very mysterious thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, like it seems like people are confronted with their personality, their persona, their ego through this, inner practice of meditation and then also bringing that out into the world. What is, as you continue like along the spiritual journey, how does that influence like how the you, like the awareness, consciousness, or the soul, like how do you interact with yourself, your psychology, your psyche, your ego? How does that
Hmm,
change?
like the question. Uh, well, the whole subject of self is very important along this journey. Who am I? Who am I really? For each of us to really ask this question, to really dig deeply into our sort of existential existence. And what I found within even doing that is there are like little traps along the way, that I've fallen into. But you could say they're not quite traps as much as they're just the next lesson. Like we're just constantly learning. And but for example, so I had this initial awakening of sorts where I started to become more aware of the voice in my head, the mind. I started to realize I am not the mind, and I started to feel some sense of liberation, a lot of peace, and oh, it felt amazing, right? But then, so I kind of felt this like transcendence of my egoic old self, the old Ryan story and all that jazz. But then, uh, my ego kind of reinvented itself. Oh, now I'm a spiritually conscious being. Oh, that feels nice, and I started to like kind of see myself as that. And I remember even like walking through grocery stores. I kind of cringe whenever I tell the story, but it's helpful and it's true. I walk into the grocery stores, and in my head, I'm thinking, do these people even realize who they're standing next to? Like, hey, it's such an inflated sense of self. Like I'm the chosen one, and uh, uh, like I could end their suffering, and instead they're more worried about what cheese to buy. And so, but really. What I came to realize is one, I fell into a superiority. My ego had reinvented itself. Now I wasn't this little Ryan human story. Now I get to be even bigger. Now I get to be this very important spiritual being. Uh, and it's satisfying to the ego temporarily, but it also, one thing I've learned about ego traps is that it always ends up in suffering. Uh, and if you're just, as long as you're staying turned on, as long as you're staying aware and honest, you'll notice the suffering is coming back in. And then that's your little red flag to say, hey, go back to the drawing board. You're missing something here. And so that's what ended up happening. The the spiritual ego is exhausting actually to keep up with. And it's one of the things I've really come to learn. And Eckhart talks a good bit about this, like the gift of being nobody in particular, of not just just like letting go of this whole self and being also sort of skillful and not allowing it to come back in, because that's the other tricky part. It takes a lot of vigilance. You could you could let it go, but then you could become the one that let it go. And now suddenly you're back, suddenly you're the one that let it go. You're no longer free. So it becomes like really subtle. And so over the years, it's like it's been that process of kind of fluctuating in and out, um, with like the sense of self. And I mean, it's interesting though, there's like paradoxes because a different way of putting this as well is the more I've, would say, I've become awakened, the more I feel a sense of oneness with others. In this way, like the self expands into including everyone else. So it's not just me, Ryan. It's me. It's all of us. Me, life. Uh, but I also find it really helpful to be careful, to be wise about not allowing a self to reaccumulate. Um, a great example, I think, Eckhart, of course, big influence of mine. I heard a talk recently where he said this perfectly. He said, you know, before I was famous, he's talking about, he said, before he was famous, um, he was nobody. Nobody knew who he was, and he was perfectly fine with that. He really enjoyed being nobody in particular. Then he became famous. He says, it's like now everybody thinks I'm somebody. But he still prefers to be nobody, even though his self could easily create a big ego because he's helped millions of people with his books and his teachings and stuff. He's helped millions of people out of suffering. I mean, quite huge achievements on the surface level. It would be very tempting for the sense of self to attach to that. But his wisdom in knowing not to do that, uh, to still just be nobody in particular, which also keeps the equality because he's not meeting someone as like more important. He doesn't have that superiorness. He's meeting as an equal. And I love that so much. And so I do my best to embody that and to come back to that like we're all equal here. Uh, even if I even if I'm making a lot of progress on my spiritual path, even if I'm taking the role of being a mentor or a spiritual teacher, e- even there, it's still we're equal. Just because I'm sort of higher up in the fact that I can help somebody along their path doesn't make me actually higher, make me more important or more valuable. We're still perfectly equal here, and that's been so important, um, in
I
order to
wonder, I
like,
wonder if it's like not just, it's not just like ego, but like life, even people who like spiritually awaken, life wants us to play a role, so in a
hmm,
sense we do have a persona, but it's like we let life play it for us, and then you can become like, yeah, like a guide, a spiritual mentor, or a yoga teacher, but you're like in service to that oneness or that unity.
yeah, yeah, and you're just kind of doing the thing that works well through you, like that you're good at. Just a skill, but you don't identify with it. You don't define yourself. Like even if like I don't know, let's say you're a professional football player. It's like great. You're really good. Your body, your form, and your past experience and stuff. You've developed this ability to be a really good football player, and that's awesome. Be a good football player. Master the sport. Enjoy the whole thing. But then if you're walking around as I'm a really good football player, now you identified with it, and that's where the ego could really get sticky, especially when maybe one day you get hurt and you can no longer be a football player. Now who are you? Oh, we tend to have existential crisis if we like the role that we're playing. Uh, we might be able to enjoy that ride for a little while, identifying with it. But then what if suddenly we get fired? Oh, now who am I? If the identity is in the role, that's going to really sting. So it's kind of opening up the duality of suffering later. Um, Whereas if you're genuinely are not identified with it, things come and things go, and you're just how may I be of service? Even if I, let's say, a spiritual teacher, I don't know, something happens and I lose all credibility. Oh, now who am I? Oh, I'm still just a point of presence. Just I'll go work at a grocery store and I'll be a presence there. And I'll just give high quality attention to whoever's in my present moment. That's most important, not the roles. But it's very tempting to fall back into like to identifying with the role and so on.
Yeah, I think the essence is, like you said, to be of service. Like, I mean, even if you are working at a grocery store, what an opportunity to serve others, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think the second one is like to be authentic, like what is your
Mm.
like your true heart? What is your true heart desiring? What role, like I said, what role does life want us to play?
Yeah. Yeah. How can I be helpful? I mean, I've been wanting to be a spiritual teacher for a long time in the sense of like, I felt like naturally uh, I enjoy teaching. Even when I was a kitchen manager and stuff, I was a corporate trainer before that. I enjoy like figuring out systems and stuff and then helping other people understand and helping teach them. Uh, it's something I just really enjoy doing. It's something I'm pretty good at. So I've always, once I started really getting into the spiritual teaching stuff or spiritual teachings in and of itself, I was like, oh, now that I'm enjoying the gifts of, I want to share it. I want to share these lovely practices and have other people experience them. So that was like my desire to be a teacher. But even so, underneath that, still held the question, well, how may I be of service? And then interestingly, other things came in, like the Eckhart community. I mean, I'm not a spiritual teacher in there. I'm more just fulfilling a function of maintaining the space uh, and making sure people are following rules and these type of things. But it's a service to something that is great. And so I find, it's interesting as well that it's not necessarily like what do we want? It's like what does the universe want? This can get real this can get real mixed up sometimes,
If someone feels lost, how can they like start tuning into that voice from the universe and
Oh,
begin try to follow it?
a nice question. You got a lot of great questions.
Thanks.
Uh, Someone feels lost. Let's see. Well, first and foremost, it's really important that we just acknowledge that we feel lost, and not in a bad way. Just we're just being honest. Honesty is truth. Truth is always a good thing to go with, especially in spirituality. We have to work with truth. But yeah, so okay, you feel like you feel lost. Well, this is actually kind of a good thing because now you're seeing that, you're willing to admit it. What do you do next? Um, I think peace is one of my main compasses. My North Star. The one of the things I trust most to move towards, and that's what to seek or to study inner peace. How do I find more inner peace? Of course, that turned into the term like stillness. So the term Eckhart uses, I'd say stillness and peace are quite connected, but stillness has a little bit more. Um, it might be a little bit more in depth in different ways. But as far as when looking at stillness, it's funny. The experience of stillness is almost like the very opposite of being lost. It's like the feeling of being found or arriving, you know, realizing, oh, I'm right where I'm supposed to be. That's an interesting one, even if you're lost, to play with that feeling of like, wait, maybe it's not so bad to be lost, or um, but either way, and recognizing you feel lost underneath, also listening to the emotion underneath that feeling of loss. Is the loss, is it more of like a heaviness of like uh, I don't know, feelings of failure or guilt or a depressed kind of thing? Um, then you want to look deeper at those emotions. Whatever the emotions underneath the feeling of being lost is. Maybe it's scary to admit we don't know things. It's okay to look at the fear and just looking deeper at these emotions if we feel lost. Um, Overwhelm. I know for sure I felt quite an overwhelm um, when I felt more lost. And another big thing for me, and it's also something I like to teach, is that I don't think there's like one path for everyone. So like if I don't really like the idea of if someone's feel lost, it's like, oh, okay, follow me and do everything I say, and you know, it's like to me, it's more like, um, okay, good, you notice you're feeling lost. Now just turn inward, go within, and also like really start exploring. You know, explore the spiritual realm of philosophy, whatever moves you, whatever you resonate with, just follow that for a little bit. Now, in this, it does require an important discernment because there are plenty of paths that are very misleading or rabbit holes that aren't really that don't end in the best of spaces places, but but you just you practice your discernment of really feeling what feels right to you and what doesn't, and and then if you make a mistake, your discernment was a little off, you go down a wrong rabbit hole. Well, if you learn from that, it really wasn't a mistake then. Now it's just a lesson, you know, and you just keep learning. And then when you're learning, your wisdom grows. And so actually, it's another different way to put, like if you're feeling lost, you just gotta like ground yourself and then just start walking, and then walk towards things that interest you, follow as what feels right, and go from there, learn from there. I mean, even when I became a yoga teacher, I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do, but it felt like yoga was in the right direction. So I studied to be a yoga teacher, and I did that for a year or two, and then I realized this isn't quite what I want to do. And I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I did feel like the yoga teaching was a nice segue or a nice, stepping stone into something else. So
You
yeah,
must
you're
have learned
feeling
a
lost.
lot. You must have learned
Sorry?
a lot by being a yoga teacher, and
Oh
then
yeah.
it's like directly related.
Yeah. Yeah. But if I had gone, oh well, I mean, yoga teaching sounds interesting, but it's not exactly what I want to do, so I'm not going to do it. I may not have been able to like just do something, just kind of move towards something and then learn from that. Uh, I did enjoy being a yoga teacher, but I also learned that it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be so focused on the physical practice of asana. I was more interested in like meditation and presence and consciousness and such, which yoga does go into, but not in the Western yoga studios, not where you can make money as a yoga teacher. Uh,
Not the Lululemon pants.
no, no.
So what are some of the qualities that people might begin experiencing if they do meditate every day? Um, what qualities of spirituality are they going to start to experience?
It's interesting. When I first started meditating, actually, I think the qualities that stood out the most was all the sufferings. Uh, it's like because prior to that, I had very rarely ever sat down and just been present with myself. I was much better at staying distracted, going, 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 doing. And this, I think, why a lot of people avoid meditation because it's like, oh shit, if I stop running away from everything, everything's going to catch up to me. Everything I've been running away from is going to catch up, which is kind of true. That's a good thing. Is the stuff that catches up to you is the stuff that wants to be processed and wants to be, understood and learned from and healed. Yeah. And so, for example, when I first started meditating, it's like um, there would be times where a lot of resistance would show up, uh, maybe irritation or restlessness. I feel boredom, uh, restless, or I don't want to be doing this. I want to be doing something else, kind of, that kind of stuff. But I just keep sitting with it and just breathing and just letting myself feel whatever's showing up and just kind of sitting through it, not giving into it in the sense of like, oh, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to go watch TV. Just really make kind of get myself to sit still with myself and be with whatever wants to show up. And in doing that, these things kind of shifted where I settled. Then the meditations became, it's like little bits of the ego kind of break, and then it becomes much more peaceful. So the more positive attributes that I think people are seeking in the first place when they want to meditate, like yeah, just a sense of ease or calm, a sense of slowing down. Uh, I mean, actually, for me, even meditation even really strengthened my sense of purpose and my sense of like, who am I really? Like, which to me was the more interesting questions to ask anyway. Like, what is this life really all about? These kind of big questions. What is my life purpose and all that kind of stuff. And so, those came in as well. Um, one real big, oh, one thing I do, I don't think I mentioned this, but for now about 5 years, I've been teaching meditation in virtual reality. It's kind of a cool new frontier how VR is offering an ability to meet with other people. Um, you can be present with them, even though they have like cartoon avatars and stuff. You still feel like you're being present with them in a space, in a common space. So it's a very interesting experience, especially when you meditate together. Um, but one thing I often say when you're doing a seated meditation practice is if your only takeaway from your seated practice for the evening or for that session, if your only takeaway was realizing that your mind is very busy, that's a successful meditation because you're noticing, right? It's because you're noticing that the mind is going. Uh, and it will happen quite often, especially early on in seated practice. The mind is, some traditions call it the monkey mind or whatever. But just learning to, so on one level, meditation is like really kind of starting to really practice and master being with our emotions, learning how to be present with them and to allow them to come and go, and you could say in a way heal them. Another aspect of it though is becoming more and more familiar with the inner workings of our mind, where our thoughts are always running off to, yeah, where whatever thoughts feel so important, and we catch ourselves in some story, about someone 3 hours ago, and we're sitting there chewing on that story, thinking about it over and over and over again. And normally we go throughout our whole day kind of doing this, but then if we sit and meditate, then we notice that we are chewing in a story, and that noticing is a really important quality. I'd say that is, in essence, kind of is what meditation is. It's just strengthening that that awareness, that inner awareness, to recognize more and more when we're lost in thought, so that way we're not as lost in thought. Uh, yeah. So big one is and then of course another very important quality within meditation is just present moment, being more present, just more here in actual reality, because it's so easy to get lost in all these thoughts and stuff. Like a good example, um, when I started practicing this more, I would go outside and sit on my front porch of my grandmother's house. I was even still smoking cigarettes back then. I was trying to quit, but I couldn't quit. But I could still be present. You could smoke a cigarette, still be present, right? So I started a cigarette and being really present, and it's like the outside environment just became it's just more beautiful. Like the sense of awe, like wow, this is actually, even though my life situation at the time, very messy, very complicated and stuff, but in that moment, everything was perfectly fine. Birds were chirping. I'd hear the sound of the birds, and it's just so lovely, so pleasant to hear the sound of the birds. And I remember thinking like, wow, I can't remember the last time I actually heard the sound of birds because I was so distracted and busy and going all the time. I never noticed the sound of the birds and how pleasant bird singing actually is. So it's a good example too of how like something meditation's really taught me. Uh, just enjoying the gift that we're sitting in, that we find ourselves in, being alive, and just yeah, what this moment is very nice. I mean, even literally right now, I'm sitting in this room talking to you. This moment is very pleasant and
Mhm.
nothing dramatic or complicated happening. It's very nice. If I were to want to go into my mental story of finances and all these different things, I could probably find things to be worked up about. But just right now, very pleasant. Another
Absolutely.
big thing meditation has taught me.
Yeah, I like to, I sense usually when I enter in the present moment, I first experience like peace and stillness. Um, there's also, like you said, there's like this aliveness,
Mm,
really potent aliveness, and then you really experience like, oh, there's these subtle sounds. I can hear the birds. I can like see beauty, it like really brings the life into that present moment, and I think
mm, mm.
it makes it really precious. And like you said, like you use the word lovely, and yeah, like precious and lovely, and it just makes you want to continue meditating and then bringing that into your everyday experience.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, it's hard to feel lost when you're feeling a loveliness. When you're just appreciating what's presently happening. You know, you don't feel lost. You feel like you just feel fortunate to just be here, wherever that might be. Uh, yeah.
A
Another,
similar, oh, go ahead, finish your point, and then I'll have a question that was brought, like that popped up in my head when you were speaking.
yeah, just that another aspect of a lot of this too. It actually has been finding comfort with not knowing things. Yeah, because our mind loves to know. It's very nature. It's like it always wants to know things and figure things out and then be like, okay, I know this and I know that and I know all this stuff. And an important, interesting part of for me about being present and or conscious and so on. It doesn't mean you know everything. It just means like, in fact, in a lot of ways, it actually means realizing more and more how much we don't know. And it can really reawaken mystery. Like sitting outside, not only is it like beautiful and lovely, it's also there's this sense of like wonder. We really don't understand this magical world we live in. We think we humans are very very quick to think we get it all. We've got it all figured out. Science has got it. And I do like science a lot. I respect science, don't get me wrong. But there's so much we don't understand about this reality. And when you can know that and you feel that, it can either be very scary or it can be very kind of exciting and like fascinating. Um, yeah. I find it to be very fascinating. And oh, another little thing. Oh, I guess what I was getting at with that though was the feeling of being lost. It's like, uh, you know, n not knowing, it doesn't have to be an uncomfortable or scary thing. It can actually be enjoyable.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that because I'm a school teacher, we
Ah,
like, yeah, that's my day job currently. And kids are taught like, oh, we need to know, we need to like learning is
mm,
associated with knowing,
mhm,
not actually wonderment and wondering, and philosophizing and theorizing. It's more like, what are the facts? What do we know for sure? How can we expand our knowledge basis? You know, it's very, I feel like knowing is literally elementary, but the point is to go beyond, like, and get into that wonderment like that and that awe that you're talking about.
well, interestingly too, most of the great discoveries, they don't come from what we already know. They come from us admitting we don't know, and we're curious about what could be, and then we've discovered something new, and profound or important or helpful. And yeah, I mean, there's value to knowing for sure, but it has a lot of limitations as well. And I definitely think if we can find more balance by coming back to not knowing, it's a really powerful thing. And also lovely to hear. I always love hearing of anyone who's like a presence practitioner within school systems because I think it's just so valuable for children to, even if you're not able to say all this stuff, just embodying your own practice is really a beautiful thing to give to children, to have children experience their own presence through adults. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I've even tried to like install the first 2 minutes of class just silence. Like guys,
Ooh,
sit down, close your books, close your laptops. Let's sit in silence. And I give them like one or two pointers during those 2 minutes. And they don't really say anything about it, but it really calms them down. And usually the lesson goes a lot smoother than it did before I did that.
that's awesome. I mean, how often do we get those moments of pause? So rare in our current society. I mean, actually, that was another thing I came up against with my meditation practice was this feeling like meditating was being not being productive, was being lazy, or was being insufficient by doing nothing. And meditating actually taught me uh, doing nothing is not only it can be very enjoyable, but it's actually very important for our well-being. To just take a break, to just give ourselves permission to rest, or to pause, or to just be and not be a continuous, production machine. But in our West society, especially, we attach a lot of value to our productivity.
Yeah, yeah. To go back to a short topic that you brought up, I feel like, because of the stress, this productivity, a lot of people feel that that stress and anxiety needs to be numbed, and
Mm,
often through some form of addiction. And specifically, like, we're not talking about like cocaine and methamphetamine, but like a lot of people have some sort of substance, whether it's like, a big one is caffeine, sugar,
mm,
people having like 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day, or too much sugar, or alcohol, things like this. How did cigarettes fall away for you? Like how can spirituality and meditation help with reducing addictions?
mm. Yeah. Well, cigarettes was a tough one to quit. The me seeing that I needed to quit was pretty obvious though, because it's well known that it's very unhealthy for our body to smoke cigarettes. Uh, so I knew that, but one of the reasons it was so difficult was because the cigarette was a calming device for me. I have a stressful day at work, and if I could go smoke a cigarette, I could just have 5 minutes of peace. It's kind of what I felt. Not only that, but then the actual physical smoking, the nicotine and stuff calms the body, and it just feels so good. Right? You're just like,
Also the
ah,
breathing, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so I realized that though, that I was dependent on the cigarettes to feel more peaceful or more calm when I felt stressed. And I realized, well, I don't want that. I mean, from a spiritual point of view, I would really like to be completely independent of any dependency, form dependencies to feel better. I would like to be able to find inner peace just through my inner being, not through anything out there, substances and stuff, let alone substances that are very unhealthy. Um, and so with that one, I yeah, I recognized it was not healthy for my body. And uh, it actually, one of the interesting things that helped a lot was realizing as I started to become more conscious of my breathing, started practicing conscious breathing more. And I noticed that when I would smoke cigarettes, I couldn't breathe in as deeply. It's like I would breathe in and it would kind of stop at like 3/4 of the way. And I couldn't breathe in, I couldn't quite get that quenching full breath. And that was like kind of bothersome. It kind of motivated me, like, well, maybe if I quit smoking, I can heal my lungs enough to get a nice full breath. And so that was part of actually what helped me quit. Um, Also, though, I think a really important part was that I started looking for other ways to manage my stress besides going for a cigarette, which so breathing techniques. I mean, there have been a lot of other techniques of meditation type of things I've done too. Chanting mantras was helpful back then. Um, Even I would, at the time too, I would, in kitchens especially, you tend to not get a break unless you smoke cigarettes. But I made it a purpose to say, you know what, I'm taking a 5 minute break, and I'd go outside and I would just sit there and breathe, which almost the exact same thing I'd be doing with cigarettes, just without the cigarette. And I realized, oh, I can actually just kind of do a very similar thing just without the nicotine high or whatever. And
More of a permanent calmness rather than a just a
yeah,
boom.
yeah. So yeah, and then once I started realizing that it was working, that I could calm myself down without that substance, that's when I found it much easier to quit cigarettes and other, gone through various other addictive behaviors. I mean, even the cell phone, be a very addictive dopamine, rush to
Technology is
get
probably
lost
the
in.
main addiction in our current society.
Well, there's one other one that Eckhart talks about. He says it's the biggest addiction in the human world. It's the addiction to thinking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Uh, that's a very intriguing. It's actually a really intriguing way to approach a lot of this. It's like, oh, you know, it's no reason, no wonder the thoughts are so persistent. When you sit and meditate and you realize your mind's very busy and you realize like, oh, it's not because I'm failing or something. It's because this is actually an addiction. Like, yeah, I found that really helpful actually in approaching the cessation of thought was realizing that it's kind of more of an addiction. But yeah, well, I mean, with substances too, like not only do you build a dependency and it's bad for the body. I mean, most substances are going to, sugar, too much sugar is not good for the body at all. Um, But it also, dependency on forms, it just kind of actually makes you more vulnerable to suffering in the long run. Um, because you're not really, also when you're numbing or you're kind of escaping from that suffering through the substance, you're not really addressing the source of the suffering. You're more just uh, dealing with the side effects. And whereas if you're, so like with my work, for example, on one end, I was practicing being more uh, using my conscious breathing with my stress. But on another end, I was also looking at, well, why am I getting stressed in the first place? The source of the stress. And I realized, let's say, with the work environment, that I was creating a lot of unnecessary time stress where I'd, and this is very common in the human mind, but we create these like expectations. Okay, I need to get this list of things done by this amount of time. And so the whole time we're doing stuff in the background, there's this tension of I've got to get this stuff done as soon as possible, you know. Uh, and then if something comes up that slows down my momentum, oh, now it's a huge problem because now I can't get my expectations done. Uh, and it just throws everything out of whack, and then that stress gets even worse. So, like, just observing too where the sources of stress are coming from, um, also quite vital, so that I can not only heal the symptom, but heal the cause.
One of the last questions I'll ask is like the necessity of having a teacher on the path. I have like a teacher I've been following for about 5 years now, and then I just kind of followed other teachers before that, just on YouTube. But like, yeah, what do you think is the power of having a teacher on the path?
Um, Well, trusting the teacher is quite important, obviously, because it's like you're kind of in a weird way, you're kind of having to trust the teacher more than yourself, because it's like yourself isn't quite getting the answers that you're seeking. Yeah, and there's this sort of this delicate aspect of like, okay, when myself, let's say a teacher says something and I don't like it, do I trust the teacher or do I trust my dislike more? Which one's right? And if you trust your dislike more, then you say, oh, that teacher's BS. Yeah. And you don't listen, you don't learn from them because you convince yourself that you know more, or something, and so there's this like interesting thing, like when this doesn't happen as much now, I think, because I've done it a lot of times, but like, let's say Eckhart says something that I don't quite agree with. Well, it's important to be honest about that. I'm not going to just say, oh, he said it, so I'm not going to even question it. I have to be honest about the fact that I don't agree with it. But then I also have to like be willing to question, well, maybe it's not him, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the one that's not getting it, you know? And I guess that's where like having a teacher is so valuable because they, you know, if they are a good teacher, like if they are, and to me, a sign of a real good teacher is somebody who's really embodied. They're not just teaching conceptually, they're not saying the right stuff, they're actually living it. When the cameras are turned off and no one's watching, they're living, or they're at least doing their best to live what they're talking about. You know, that to me is the thing I've always looked for the most in, and that's a very hard thing to discern, though. How do you really know? You know, the how do you really know the integrity of a teacher? Because you can't follow them around all day long. You know, you can't know what's going through their mind or what desires they might have underneath and all these type of things. So that's a tricky discernment, but it's something that I slowly came to have with Eckhart. And on top of that, though, for me, with let's say Eckhart, is like every time I studied his work, it worked for me. It just produced results, you know, very effective results. My felt more peace, felt more stable, more in control of my reactivity. And all these things that I was kind of wanting, they were happening. And so, you know, that too helped build my trust that like, yeah, okay, he knows what he's talking about. And even when I don't feel like he does. Uh, and you know, another big gift, but also challenge between the teacher-student relationship is that the student, it's just it's a step in us admitting we don't know, which is can be a good thing. Just to admit I don't know, and this person seems like they got it figured out, so I'll explore them a little bit. Um, Of course, you know, again, I always feel like be a little careful though, because there is some vulnerability in that. You know, unfortunately, like 70s and 80s, right? There was this sort of like cult epidemic where, you know, humans pretended to be spiritual, or maybe they really thought they were spiritual teachers, right? And then they presented themselves as spiritual teachers, and then people came and joined them, and then there was this power dynamic, and more than likely the teacher wasn't really able to handle that power and got consumed in it, and their ego reinstated itself, and then it corrupted the whole thing, you know, and led to sex scandals or money scandals or all kinds of stuff. And and what's more concerning to me than the scandals themselves too is that like if you give your whole heart and trust to a teacher, but they're not really grounded in what they're teaching, they could actually mislead you quite deeply. You know, they could actually plant a lot of false ideas into your mind or ego patterns. They could strengthen your ego rather than helping you out of your ego, you know, which would then lead to more suffering. So that's where my concern of like, just, you know, try to do your best to be very discerning. But also don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, don't, uh, okay, so another example is when I was first getting into all of this, I remember hearing the term guru, and I did never liked the idea of a guru, like being submissive to a teacher to that degree, like you're kissing their feet and stuff. I'm still not really into that, but um, although I've learned like for some people that actually seems to really just work for them, and it gives them a lot of peace. So all the love and power to that, but it's not for me. And so in that sense, I'm kind of honoring what feels right to me, you know, not just doing something because other people are saying it. Uh, but the other thing is, where was I going with that? Oh, even even when I first came across Eckhart, you know, interestingly, when I first came across his book, The Power of Now, I remember not liking it, and I remember like not liking him. I felt like who's this guy think he is? I remember that there was that feeling. Yeah, this guy's talking about enlightenment. Who the hell does this guy think he is like my reaction. And um, but I was just so desperate for some kind of help and answers that I gave the book a try, and then it turned out to be very helpful for me. Um, but just learning to like where our intuition might be telling us to stay away from something which is wise to listen to versus where maybe our ego just feels threatened, rightfully so. Because I believe when I felt intimidated by Eckhart or when I was judging him, really it was my ego scrambling and saying, "Oh, I don't, we shouldn't study this guy because then I'm in the ego's in trouble," which would be true. He was a huge facilitator in helping me dissolve a lot of the ego. Uh, so. I don't know, that's another interesting thing. But yeah, when working with a teacher, I mean, teachers aren't perfect either. We're all humans and we're all doing our best. Another thing I really look for in a teacher, like one of the things I love about Ram Dass, is how authentic, like honest he was about his faults. It just seemed like he didn't hesitate at all to call himself out in publicly at that, which I've always really admired because it can be tempting, like let's say you're a teacher now and you're playing the role of a teacher, it can be tempting to kind of hide your stuff to protect your image of being a legitimate teacher, you know. But ironically, what I've noticed is whenever I um, am really like some of the most helpful content I've created wasn't how do you meditate, it was the traps I've fallen into. Oh, here's where my spiritual ego happened. It was about where I failed in my practice that people could actually relate and and learn even more from rather than. So that's interesting as well. Just being transparent actually is a really lovely teaching. Uh, okay, so let's see. Your question though, I definitely think it can be valuable, but just to be careful because not everyone that presents themselves as a teacher is necessarily ready. Like you might see on Instagram, there are some people that are really famous spiritual influences that I don't really get a good vibe from. I don't feel like they're really integrated. And I'm concerned for the many people that are following them that are taking in their wisdom as if it's truth when I can kind of see through it and see a lot of it's not very deep or helpful. But a lot of people are taking it in as it is, and they're kind of just being misled in that way, which I used to get really worked up about that. Since then, I've surrendered it because it's all just kind of part of the dance that we're going through in our, um, and the other thing is like, if you choose the wrong teacher, uh, then it'll just be more lessons. That's all. Just keep learning. So eh, you don't want to be like scared to make any mistake that you don't take any action either. But I do like to warn. I just like to remind people to be careful who you lean on, even in a like okay, let's the Eckhart communities, which I really enjoy being a part of. But there's oftentimes, someone will ask a question and you get a lot of answers. A lot of people like to immediately kind of put on the role of being a teacher. And out of those 100 answers, like how many of them really like are integrated? Not very many, probably. They're more just going from their memory and from their concept and from maybe their egoic desire to be seen as a teacher, which, again, no judgment, but this is where like you have to be careful whose advice you take. Just because somebody speaks confidently or says what sounds like the right thing doesn't mean they fully know what they're talking about, and they could be leading you down an unhelpful rabbit hole. So I've always been a little concerned about that. I think because I'm a big brother. I have seven younger sisters, so there's this part of this role in me that's always going to be protective, and and I feel that even in the spiritual realm, like I want to protect people that are just can be so easily kind of go down the wrong paths, and then, but I've learned like even then, even that's part of the path. It's the kind of beautiful thing. Like even if you go down the wrong path, as long as you're willing to like keep being aware and learn, it's actually not a mistake. It's just another lesson, which creates more wisdom. And so then it's a gift. It was kind of needed, apparently. You needed that to strengthen your discernment a little more or whatever. So, but yeah, I think teachers can be very helpful. Oh, last thing I'll say about teaching student relationship though as well, like for me with my mentoring, uh, I have no intention of being someone's mentor forever. My intention as a spiritual teacher is to just maybe help, depending on where the person's at. If they're just beginning, there might be a good bit of help required between us. But for others, they might be pretty far along and they just need help with couple little areas to kind of fine tune or to be held accountable for. And then, my goal, so to speak, is not to be someone's teacher forever, but just help them uh, get their momentum going to where they become self-sufficient, where they become their own teacher. That to me is the whole point. We kind of we really become connected to the teacher within us, the truth within us, and and in which case, yeah, it, I don't. if I, as a teacher for me, like, or even Eckhart, I mean, even though it's interesting because I still see him as my teacher, I still feel like he's a fair bit farther along in his mastery than I am. Um, but I still kind of I feel like a friend now. Before I used to see him like only as teacher. Now I see him kind of more in the equalness of like a friend, you know. And I don't desperately need his teachings anymore. I still find them very helpful, especially even for what I'm trying to approach in being a teacher. Like, oh, that's a good way to explain this particular thing, you know. Uh, but my point there, like even with having a teacher can be very helpful, but uh, ultimately the point's to graduate in a sense, you know, rather than because you could also become dependent on a person, just like you could become dependent on a substance. You can become dependent on a spiritual teaching in a way that like stops you from fully realizing it within. It's inside you, you know, and it is you ultimately. Uh, So of course, it's not a great business plan to to not want to have lifelong mentees because somebody graduates, it's like, oh, there goes that income. But I much prefer that because that to me is what it's really all about is helping individuals become confident enough within their own journey to then continue navigating. I mean, like when you die, for example, people don't die with you. When you die, you're the one that dies. You're the one that goes on to who knows what, whatever's next. Yeah, ultimately, we always have to. We're kind of ultimately this is kind of a solo journey in a way. Ironically, it's also collective. It's massively a collective journey. But uh, yeah, so in that sense, I think teachers can be absolutely helpful with the discernment of making sure you're kind of following ones that are uh, aligned and conscious, and then from there, yeah, just being careful not to be too dependent on them that you disregard your own inner teacher.
Great advice. Great advice. If someone listening is interested in like connecting with you, I'll probably put them in the description of the YouTube video, but what are some ways people can connect with you?
My website is kind of has a nice central hub for everything. It's Ryan. It's actually RyanAstheimer.com, but nobody knows how to spell Astheimer. So I also have a URL that's RyanTeachings.com. Easier to spell. And it's got all my YouTube videos, and I'm on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, and I do one-on-one mentoring and occasionally courses. I'll do some online courses as well. But yeah, anyone appreciates that resonates, then feel free to reach out. I'm another big thing for me, especially with well any of my work, but the mentoring is yeah, I'm not here for them doing it for the money. Uh, so if the price is uncomfortable for you, just let me know, and we'll do it for whatever price you need, or free even. I've done tons of free sessions because I just want to be of service. It's not like, oh, I'll help you if you can afford me. It doesn't really resonate. So yeah, if you think I could be of service to your path, please always feel free to reach out.
It's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people probably will like just when I tune into your energy, I feel like this like wisdom kind of pouring out of you. So I've really appreciated the conversation. I've learned a lot and I'm super happy that we connected.
Likewise, yeah, and lovely questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, is there anything that you'd like to say before we close or
Let's see. A funny thing, something I learned from Eckhart, it comes back to the not knowing practice, is even when doing teachings or offering advice and stuff, to not prepare anything. I didn't prepare anything for this. To me, it's really about just doing my best to embody my practice. So as long as I'm practicing right now, everything else will work out just fine, including giving advice or whatever, giving bits of wisdom. But if I was like caught up in like, oh, people are expecting me to say something wise, that'd be like stressful, and then I wouldn't say things as wise. So it's just a funny sort of a paradox there, but one of the most helpful things is what I mentioned a little earlier about like really just getting comfortable with not knowing, and yet somehow there's a trust underneath that that it'll work beautifully and flow nicely, and then it does, and then yeah, you just keep going and learning. Oh, okay. One other thing I've noticed a lot as a mentor that I might be a good thing to end on as well, just to be mindful of not being too hard on yourself uh, as you go throughout your journey. If, you know, making mistakes is all part of learning, and sometimes we can be our own worst critics. We can be really hard on ourselves. So that's been really helpful to my own journey, and something I've seen a lot in mentoring is so just be mindful of that. Um, when we can be more patient and forgiving with ourselves, it also shows up that we can be more patient and forgiving with all the other humans. And but yeah, thank you for having me here, and it's lovely being present with you. And I wish you and all listening a lovely journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it. And hopefully this is not the last time we talk. So I'll you have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks, you too.
Yeah. I'll see you later. Bye bye.